Welcome to Widow Too Soon. This is Michelle Bader Ebersole. I hope you guys are all doing great today. I am not with Mark as usually I am. He is on vacation, but he'll be back very, very soon. And I just recorded a few days ago, so I don't really have a lot to report since I last recorded. Things are going well. My kids are getting out of school in a couple weeks. We have a choir concert tonight. Oh, this is kind of cool. Haley did her first activity as an incoming senior. They had a candlelight ceremony at her school where the seniors light the juniors candles and then blow them out, and they're like, this is the class of 2024. So it was kind of cool, but also I started getting teary-eyed thinking about another graduation without Luke, because we just went through that last year with Hayden. And it definitely brings up the grief and those feelings of like when you see all the parents sitting together and you're not. And even though I have Joel, he wasn't there yesterday, but he'll be at graduation. It's not the same as Haley having her dad. So it brought up a little bit of grief, but overall, we're doing good. So I'm going to get right into the episode. We have a special guest today that I'm very, very excited about. My new friend, Cyndi Smith. She is also a widow and has a lot of great stories that I think are going to help you about just persevering, about life, about dating, and just about how to get through this crazy, crazy journey as a widow. So Cyndi, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited that we found each other on Instagram, even though it took me a little while to get back to you. You know how if you don't know people, it goes in that like other box or the spam
Yeah, I
box
never
or
forget.
whatever. I just went through those and found yours. So thanks for being patient and still being here. And also Cyndi is a blogger, which she'll get to talk about in a little bit. She wants to help widows with her blogging. So it's awesome. So Cyndi, I'd love if you could just start by just telling us your story about, maybe even backing it up to a little bit about your husband and like how you met, and then, your journey that you took with him, and then kind of where you are now as a widow. So that's a lot, but we have as much
Sure.
time as we need. We don't ever have like timed episodes. So I'm going to let you talk and I might just ask some questions as we go, but thank you for being here. And I'd love to have you share with the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. We might have to Uber Eats ourselves some food because it's a long story.
That's all
Um,
right.
so I met my husband online in 2011, and we were both, I like to say that we were the founding members of Twitter because it was back when
Nice.
Twitter was fun, right?
Uh-huh.
We actually met under a weight loss hashtag,
Okay, cool.
and he had lost 200 pounds and I had lost 100
Oh my
pounds.
gosh. Wow.
Yeah, so he was scrolling through Twitter and he saw my picture pop up under the hashtag, and his first thought was, "She looks really mean," and then he
Oh
hit
no.
follow. Yeah. So when
Wait, she looks mean, so I'm gonna
so
follow.
I'm gonna
That's
follow. I was a
funny.
glutton for punishment from the beginning. So
Yeah.
he we started a friendship and we talked. We would update each other on our weight loss, and then
Mm.
and slowly it evolved. I don't think either one of us really realized that it was evolving because at the time he lived in Oxford, England,
Oh
and I was in
wow.
Atlanta, Georgia. So it seemed like just a long distance friendship at the time. So
Yeah.
um, we at one point he was going on dates. I was going on dates. I had been married and divorced at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and he went on a blind date, and I was on my way. I was driving myself to go meet a guy that I had no business at all going out with, but I was anyway. And he called me because of the time difference. I said, "How'd your date go?" He said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, she stood me up." And I said, like it just fell out of my mouth. I was like, "That's crazy. I'd never do that to you." And
Wow.
he said, "I would cut off my arm for a girl like you." And I took
Oh,
the very next exit on the freeway and turned around and went home, and we talked on the phone all night.
oh, I love it.
So, yeah, the decision was made for him to come visit,
Mm-hmm.
and at first he was just gonna come and visit Atlanta for 30 days, and he did, and we had the most amazing summer ever, but by the end of his visit, he had extended his stay until 12:59 on the 90th day, which is
Whoa.
the latest po he had 1 minute left to legally be in
Oh
the
my
US before he
goodness.
had to go, yeah. So he flew back home, and he was there for about 8 weeks, and then he came back permanently.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't and then my daughter was born less than a year later, so, uh, my entire family thought he was an axe murderer and that he was gonna kill
Oh
me,
my goodness.
and I don't know what, I'm not the person that usually would even consider dating
Mhm.
anyone that way, and at that time, online dating wasn't that much of a thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
people really were, getting in themselves in lots of trouble by dating strangers, but it worked out, and we had a really wonderful life together. We had 1 daughter. We went through 4 years of fertility treatments,
Mm.
and, we tried to have another baby, and we couldn't. We had multiple
Mm.
losses, and at the time, I remember being so angry at God, but
Mm.
now looking back, I know it was protection because I
Yeah.
know that I didn't know at the time that I was going to have to raise a child of my own,
Right.
and it's still not easy, but it's much easier to raise 1 than it is to raise 5 like we wanted.
Right.
Like, so, he was diagnosed with cancer in January of 2018,
Mm.
and we had very little warning. He worked for the railroad, and I mean, he had a very physical job. He never had really health problems. He had a
Mm.
few weird things happen before his diagnosis, but it was mainly like he always ate the very hottest, spiciest vindaloo, like Indian food, and all of
Mhm.
a sudden he couldn't do that anymore.
Okay.
Excuse me. So he went to the doctor at 33 years old and he said, "Hey, I'm having this terrible heartburn. Like, I can't, if I eat spicy food, it upsets my stomach." And they prescribed him an antacid and sent him on his way at that time.
Wow. Mhm.
So a few months after that, we went to Disney World for our family vacation. Just, I was so excited. We'd saved all year, right? And while we were there, it was the year that everyone was getting the flu so bad and the flu was
Mm.
killing people, right? So
Yeah.
I got the flu and ended up in the ER.
Wow.
Yeah, so um I was having a big pity party for myself in the hotel room because I had to
Mhm.
stay behind while he and my daughter went and rode rides and went to
Right.
amusement parks. But looking back now, I'm like, wow, he needed that time with her. It was like the last
Yeah.
little bit of normalcy, right?
Right.
So on the way home from Florida, I was better, but he got worse. He had it as well, and his just continued to progress, right? So we took him to the doctor and they prescribed him Tamiflu. And Tamiflu is not regularly taken or prescribed in England. It's not really a thing that they do.
Mm.
So he had never had it before. So when he started to have a very violent reaction, we thought it was to the Tamiflu.
Mhm.
So I rushed him to the emergency room with just terrible symptoms. I mean, he felt like at that point that he was dying and he was severely dehydrated. They dropped several bags of fluid in him and sent us home and said discontinue the Tamiflu. Well, less than 24 hours later, he was throwing up blood.
Oh, no.
So we went to the ER that night and I still really don't know how physically I did it, but he couldn't walk and he was 6'4",
Oh, wow.
280 pounds. And I basically dragged him out of the house and put him in the car because I had my daughter
Wow.
at the time. She was 4 and I couldn't leave her at home. There was no time to
Right.
get a sitter, right? So at the ER, they did several tests and scans and they found a blockage in his colon.
Oh.
Yeah. So initially, they were telling us that the blockage in his colon must be from being severely dehydrated because he got dehydrated so fast. It must just be food, right?
Mhm.
And they sent us to another hospital by ambulance for the purpose was for removal of this blockage, right?
Right.
No one ever said cancer because we're looking at a 33-year-old guy that's
Right.
otherwise very healthy. In the middle of the surgery to remove the blockage, the surgeon came out to talk to me and had me very quickly sign paperwork agreeing to place an ileostomy bag on him.
Oh, wow.
And I was very confused. I was like, well, what are we, first of all, I had to Google what an ileostomy bag was. I had no idea,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, what are we talking about? And he was like, I think it's cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And I I remember vividly because it was still during this terrible flu outbreak. And while he was in surgery, I told all my family, I said, no, no, don't come up here because if this is the flu and it's this bad, you guys are going to get sick too. So I was sitting
Mhm.
alone in this surgical waiting room, and I remember feeling a shift between what we had before and now. It
Mhm.
was almost like a switch flipped of this is
Yeah.
your happy life and it's gone,
Mm. Ugh.
right?
Yeah.
So he almost died a couple times on that hospital stay. And about a week later, they confirmed his diagnosis of stage 4 colon cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. So um, he fought very hard. We did every treatment. You know,
Yeah.
I told him he went through 2 very aggressive rounds of chemo, and I'd always told him, I said, "When you're done, when you've had enough, you tell us. It's your
Yeah.
you have the
Mhm.
choice." Like, we weren't gonna make him do anything. But he fought really hard, and he people would see him, like, we would be at church, and he'd be running around and chasing the kids in the youth group,
Mm.
and people would go, "That guy has cancer?" Like, you couldn't tell.
Right.
He was still
Uh-huh.
very active. He, ran the Rump Shaker 5K
Mm.
in our city and, to support colon cancer research. He was just very, he was an amazing person before cancer, but
Right.
cancer just magnified who he was. And he really could have just laid in the bed and done nothing. And he chose to take it as a sign and as a reason to tell everyone about
Mhm.
colon cancer and how dangerous it was and how it's not an old man's disease like people think it is. And I think one of the most poignant things that happened during his illness was that he was raised in England, and they're raised under Church of England. They go to Church of England schools. It's a lot like
Oh,
Episcopal
okay.
Church, right?
Right.
It's he called it forced Christianity.
Mm.
He
Mhm.
believed in God, but he didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and he didn't know enough. I mean, he was like, "Yes, church, I go. We sit, we
Right.
stand, we kneel, whatever." And he was very angry. He was angry at God
Yeah.
at that moment about his diagnosis. Despite his pretty good attitude about everything else, that was a major roadblock. And we kept having this guy come, one of the pastors from our church would come and talk to us and say, "What can we do to help?" And I remember looking at him one day and I said, "I think he's going to die. And I think we need to worry about his eternity. And I need
Wow.
you to help me." Yeah. I said, "I need you to help me get him to know Christ so that we don't have to worry about that."
Wow.
And there were times, because it was up and down, chemo's terrible, right? There
Uh-huh.
were times, his name was Jeff. He's still one of our very best friends. He's on staff at our church. And there were times Jeff walked into the house and Matt yelled at him to leave.
Mm.
I mean, he pushed back and he wanted nothing to do. He was very angry at God. And we've been taught our whole lives that we're not allowed to be angry at God, but I don't
Right.
find that to be true. I
No,
think
I don't
it's okay
either.
to question God, right?
Yep. He can handle it. Yep.
Yeah. So when one Sunday morning, like I basically dragged him to church every Sunday. I said,
Mhm.
I'm doing this. I'm doing everything I can possibly do. Just go and listen, right?
Yeah.
And one Sunday morning, he texted Jeff and he said, "I believe."
Mm.
Yeah. So um, yeah. So he was baptized,
Oh, that's so
and he
awesome.
told they took a video. He shared his testimony, and it was a very comforting knowing.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a very comforting thing knowing that he got it and that we didn't
Mhm.
have to worry about his eternity, right? So we continued treatment until they told us that there was nothing else we could do. And then we had heard at one of his last surgeries, I randomly ran into this man in the waiting area when he was having surgery to drain the fluid on his lungs. And he struck up conversation. And I found it odd because, usually in hospitals, you're not talking to
Yeah.
strangers in the
No.
hospital. You're all there for different reasons. And
Uh-huh.
this guy started talking to me and he said, "What are you in for?" And I told him, yeah, I told him my husband has colon cancer and, whatever. And he looked at me and he said, "I had colon cancer and I was
Mm.
healed by going to Colorado for this treatment. It's alternative treatment called mistletoe therapy, right?"
Mm.
Yes, it sounds crazy. It's European mistletoe therapy, and he showed me he went home that day and came back to the hospital because we were there for a few days with a stack of paperwork showing the progression of his disease and how it healed it.
Wow.
Yeah. So our last ditch effort was that, but
Right.
it cost $10,000, and man, we raised $10,000 in 2 weeks. We had lemonade
Wow.
stands, we had sales, everything. We got to Colorado and it was too late. He tried, but had we known about that beforehand, had we known about that when he was first diagnosed, I really truly think we would have had a shot, you know.
Yeah.
But it allowed us to have that time with him in Colorado.
Yeah.
It was a whole body therapy, so he got massages and was comforted at that time.
Yeah.
But while we were there, his oxygen, he couldn't, I don't know if it was the altitude, his lungs got worse.
Mm.
And we took him to the emergency room, and they told me, they said, you need to get him back. Where's home? And I said, Alabama. They said, you need to get him back as fast as possible, and he can't fly.
Oh, wow.
We had flown out for the treatment,
Yeah.
right? He was on oxygen at that point, and he needed continuous oxygen. So I will never not sing the praises of Enterprise Rental Car, because we called them and told them the situation, and they said, here's the address, go pick up a car. And we drove a one-way rental that we didn't pay a dime for,
Wow.
from Colorado back to Alabama. And
Amazing.
I remember looking at him in the rearview mirror on the way back, because I drove, and he loved a road trip, right?
Mhm.
And he had always wanted to drive across America. And he was finally getting to do it, and he couldn't hold his eyes open.
Mm.
So we planned our stops as we went along the way, to make sure we were really close to a cancer center or a level 1 trauma center,
Right.
because I knew that if anything happened, he needed that kind of care, right? We got back home and we went to the ER the next day. We got home, kept him on, he was on oxygen. The next day we went to the ER, and his whole medical team was there. We're very fortunate. We live in Birmingham, Alabama, and we have University of Alabama at Birmingham. It's a premier medical school. They have an amazing cancer center,
Mm.
and we met with everyone. I mean, the room was full. Everyone was here. His parents were here, and he looked at me from the bed and he said, I think I'm done.
Mm.
And I knew that I had to honor my vows and my promises to him in that moment, because I feel like when people get married, they think, oh, better for worse, whatever. But you
Yeah.
really don't have that. Your vows are really not tested
Right.
until you're in that situation,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
100%. Mhm.
So, all along the way, I wanted to make sure I didn't want after the fact for anyone in our family to be able to say, well, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. So every decision we made as a group, right? I'm
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
he says this, we have to honor this. So everyone's on the same page. And he went home on hospice.
Mhm.
But something happened after he went home on hospice. It's almost like the decision and knowing he didn't have to be tortured with more chemo or
Yeah.
treatment gave him a boost, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So most people, they tell you, will call the hospice nurses, call you to come visit or to come, do your visits or whatever. And they would call him, and he'd say, they call his cell phone, and we didn't have a house phone. And he'd say, I'm at Home Depot. And they said, Mr. Smith, you're supposed to stay home. And
That's
he's like,
so
I'm not
funny.
staying home. I feel good. We're going out. Right. And it was very, I mean, he stayed on hospice so long that insurance kicked him off because he didn't die fast enough, which
Mm.
he thought was hilarious. Right.
Mhm.
So, towards the end, he had done everything he wanted to do. We actually, because he was from England, towards the end, he started asking to go home. He wanted to go back to England, and there
Oh,
was just
wow.
no way, right?
Yeah.
His parents were there with us, so we were all there together. And there is a British shop in Atlanta where we lived and
Oh.
started our marriage, and it's amazing. They have British foods and stuff. And we called them and we said, hey, do you have any British sausages? Because that's what he wanted. He wanted like British bacon,
Mm.
sausages, all his food from his childhood. And we explained the situation, and I said, okay, we're going to send somebody over there to get it. And 2 hours later, they were sitting on our doorstep with a box of British things. They drove over
Oh,
from Atlanta. Yeah.
that's amazing.
So, little things like that along the way helped, but he declined, and it was like watching the end of a slow, sad movie,
Yeah.
and he begged us not to go back to the hospital. He didn't wanna die in the hospital.
Right. My husband either. I get it. Hmm.
Oh, and we honored his wishes, right? I mean, what do you
Yep.
do? Like,
Right.
you know, we had hard talks in those last few weeks. Um, he gave me permission to do a lot of things that I couldn't even imagine. I mean, like he called me into the bedroom one day while he was on hospice and he pulled his oxygen off. So I knew it was serious because he needed
Yeah.
to really talk, right? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's he going to tell me? Is there a love child somewhere? Like, has he second mortgaged the house and I don't know about it, right? And he said to me, he said, when I die, I want you to move on. And I remember being so mad at him.
Mm,
And I said, how can you say that? I'm losing my whole life is falling apart and you're telling me to move on. And he said, I don't want you spending the rest of your life grieving the likes of me. You have to move on,
wow.
be happy. And man, I don't know if I could say the same thing. I would be the one that was like, I'm haunting you from the grave.
Right. Yeah.
But it gave me permission when
That's
when I
amazing.
did start dating again, I kept remembering those words and,
Yep.
he made it clear to his parents that that's what he wanted for me, and they've been nothing but supportive, and it was like a gift
It
that
is
I
a
really
gift.
I didn't know I needed that, right?
Hmm.
And on a Saturday afternoon in August, he died in our living room, surrounded by everyone that he loved, including our daughter was there as well. She was 6 at the time, and when they pulled him out of our house to take him, because he had chosen to be cremated, when they
Hmm.
pulled him out of our house, the sky was pink. It was like pink and orange with these streaks. And I took a picture.
Wow.
And I'm like, it's like he was going, it's like he'd gotten home, right? And
Yep.
I think a lot about the last breath he took because we were waiting. So it was agonizing, just waiting.
Hmm.
And the hospice nurse kept telling us, she said, he won't die in front of his mother. People don't die in front of their moms. The mom usually walks out of the room or something happens and then it happens. Well, she said that's had been her experience. Well, his mother stepped out on the back patio to call his brother and give him an update, and he hadn't opened his eyes in hours. And he took the biggest breath and said he raised his shoulders up off the hospital bed, and he and me and his dad were watching him because I'm like, if nobody was with me, I would think I was seeing things. And his eyes got really big and he looked really excited, and then that was it.
Wow. Like he saw heaven or something.
Saw it. Yeah. And
Wow.
before that, I mean, like any other Christian, I was like, you always question. You're like, well, what if
Yeah.
it's not real? What if
Right.
it's not what we think it's going to be?
Right.
In that moment, that was all the confirmation that I needed because I believe wholeheartedly that he saw Jesus in that moment.
Wow.
I do. So yeah, and but before he died, he had also given me a ridiculous list of places to spread his ashes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was a really funny guy.
Sounds like.
Yeah, so I think he made this list and made me promise. I don't know if it was the fentanyl talking at the end,
Right.
right? The morphine, like whatever.
Yeah.
He was in a significant amount of pain, so they had him on all this
Uh-huh.
medication. And so he wanted me to spread him at the Floribama, which is a bar in
Oh.
South Alabama on the beach. It's not exactly a high class facility. He wanted me to spread him in the waters there. He wanted to be spread on Bourbon Street in New Orleans
Oh
because
my
he loved
gosh.
New Orleans, right?
Uh-huh.
You know, he wanted to be made into bullets and shot out of a gun because he
Oh
built
my
guns. I
goodness.
know it was all this ridiculous stuff. And his mom told me, she was like, you don't have to do any of these things. And I said, yes, I do, because I told him that I would. So we've made it about halfway through the list, and
Oh my goodness.
I haven't gotten arrested yet, but we've done
Yeah.
some pretty questionable things at this point. So yeah.
What about the gun one? Like, how does that even put in a bullet? Is that possible?
Apparently it is. I have not done that one yet because
Yes.
he wanted to be shot out in his favorite field where he and one of his best friends would go shooting guns, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, so I haven't done that one. He like the Bourbon Street one I did.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
I I had never dealt with cremated remains before, so I polled all my mom friends. I was like, "How do I do this? What do I do? Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
open the box. Like,
Yeah.
what do I do?" Right? And one of my mom friends decided that the most logical way was to put some remains in a empty Parmesan cheese container so we could. So
Oh
that's
my
what we did. Okay. So the problem with that is though we were in New Orleans and we were walking up and down Bourbon Street and we're like, How are we gonna do this? There's people
right.
everywhere, right? And I accidentally opened the wrong side. So instead of sprinkling it clumped.
Oh, oh
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. It's been an adventure for sure.
Yes, he sounds very funny.
It was hilarious. So one of the places, we had his memorial service in England, or when we
Oh.
went to England, we had one here for his
Mhm.
friends and stateside, and then we had one in England, in Wales, actually, on the beach where he played as a kid.
Mm,
So
so
we
cool.
spread some of his ashes there, with all of his childhood friends, and just really, you know, he was such a sentimental person.
Mhm, sounds like it.
And I think he gave us all these places to spread his ashes to make us travel and do things and not have an excuse to just sit home, right? Because I
Yeah.
started thinking like, okay, how are we gonna do this without getting arrested, right? Like, so, but yeah, I never thought that I would be carrying a box of cremated remains through the airport, but
Right?
I did.
Mhm.
And what was actually awesome about that, because he told me to split his remains with his parents. And
Mhm.
I was like, "Well, which part do I get?" Right? Like,
Right.
which how do you know? So, I
Yeah.
did that, and, um, I couldn't put him on the floor of the plane. I just it just didn't sit right
Yeah.
with me, right? So, I
Right.
just held the box. Well, everyone, the pilot and the flight attendants, they all knew ahead of time because you have to
Okay.
report that you're carrying remains.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they were really, I mean, TSA was awesome, like, the way they handled it. Because my daughter was with me, and that she
Yeah.
had no idea that they were
Okay.
checking anything, but they have to, right?
Yeah.
And every flight attendant and and the pilots came back to speak to us and said, the pilot said, we're gonna get him home as quick as possible,
Mm.
right?
That's so
And
nice.
at the end of the flight, they held the plane and they had an announcement. They explained that they were taking um, a British citizen home to his final resting place, and they had us stand up.
Oh.
Yeah, and that was very. I mean, the flight attendants walked by when the plane landed and touched the box and said, "Welcome home."
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
it was pretty awesome. I mean, I expected nothing, and the kindness, right? It was
Mhm.
just,
Wow.
yeah,
What a beautiful but heartbreaking story, but I see so much beauty. My favorite thing is how when the pastor, I believe you said Jeff, asked, is there anything we can do? You said we need to get, his eternity figured out, and I
yeah,
love that you we're thinking big picture and like eternity and really, whether he wanted to go to church or not, you brought him and eventually he was saved and we know where he is.
yeah,
And that is so, so beautiful. The love that you had and have, it never
sure,
stops, the love we still have for our spouses. It's so beautiful what I see in you, just this wonderful story. And I see so much joy too. Like God has brought you these little glimpses and these little gifts throughout the way. Now, I'd love to know, okay, so that's your story up until then, but then what was it like your first few days as a widow? Like what, just walk us through the first little bit as a widow, what life was like for you.
um, when my husband died on a Saturday, we promised him that we would continue to go to church. So on
Oh,
Sunday,
good.
the whole family got up and we all went to church.
Wow.
And our church surrounded us by so much love and support. On Monday, we planned the funeral, or his celebration of life, which he insisted he didn't want any, he wanted everyone to dress in bright colors because he didn't want to scare our daughter with all black,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And everyone did that. And on Tuesday we had the funeral. And Wednesday my daughter started first grade.
Oh, wow.
And on that Wednesday I also went to work as a preschool teacher after not working her entire life, and she was
Oh
6.
my goodness. It's a lot.
So my you know my way of handling it I do not recommend, but I thought that
Mhm.
if I could just power through it, that I could get over it faster. I was
Mm.
determined not to let it break our family.
Mhm.
I was determined not to let it destroy my daughter's life,
Mhm.
and I thought I was doing a pretty good job. I look back now and I see all the mistakes I made because I had no guidance. I mean, how do nobody swooped in and told me, let's sit down and talk about your financial paperwork and how to protect yourself, and let's sit down and,
Right.
like come up with a plan. People checked on us, but I guess what I didn't expect is the friends you have before an illness like that are much different than the friends you have during an illness like that.
Mhm.
And then something happens after the funeral because for everyone else, that's the finality of it.
Right. Yeah.
But
Mhm.
for you, it's not. So we lost a lot of our couple friends because all of a
Yes.
sudden I'm the odd man out. Like
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden I'm a threat to, be around us, I guess, or they just couldn't relate to us anymore, or they didn't know
Right.
what to say. I think most people have good intentions,
Right.
but everyone disappeared. And I remember the Friday night after he died, I was sitting folding clothes, and I was actually folding the clothes that we had had on him before he
Mm.
died. I mean, that it was that. And I remember thinking that night, I was like, laundry doesn't stop for anything, right?
Right. True.
Like it just keeps
Yeah.
going. And there was no one there. And, to my family's credit, his parents had been in America so long, they had to go back to England.
Yeah.
His grandmother was ill 2 weeks after he died. His grandmother died. They were going through it too,
Whoa.
right? My family lived a couple hours away. Like, they can't all quit their jobs and take care of me,
Yeah.
But I wish that I would have been strong enough, or I wish at that time that I wouldn't have thought that I was being so strong and I would have asked for help,
Right.
because my blanket answer when anybody asked me what if I was okay, I would say, "Yeah, sure, I'm great," because I thought
Uh-huh.
if I told myself that I would be.
Right.
So what happened for me, is I had never really been a huge drinker,
Mhm.
but I started having a glass of wine at night after my daughter went to bed, and that turned into
Yep.
2, which turned into 4, which turned into I'm drinking a Boda box before daylight because I couldn't sleep,
Right.
you know? Um, uh, the doctor, like, my personal doctor was like, "Oh, wow, your husband just died." So when I called to ask for something to help, they threw a Xanax prescription
Oh,
at me.
yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
Xanax and wine together is like a recipe for disaster, right?
Mm.
And I very quickly, became dependent on both of those things. And I remember walking through church a couple of weeks after he died, and I wasn't drunk because I only drank at night,
Mhm.
but I had been taking the prescribed Xanax in the amount that I was told to, and it was like I was in a daze and I was
Yeah.
smiling and people were looking at me like, "What is wrong with her? Her husband just died."
Mm.
And nobody stepped in and said, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about this."
Right.
Everyone's kind of giving me my space, and I was on a quick road to self-destruction. You know, I can't
Yeah.
I can't tell you in those first few months what my child ate for dinner. I
Mhm.
know that she made it to school sometimes.
Mhm.
I was probably the world's worst employee because I called in all the time,
Yeah.
you know. But everyone around me seemed to just be giving me room to get over it or to self-destruct or whatever.
Mhm.
And I wish that someone would have tough loved me a little bit, but I don't know if
Yeah.
I would have listened at that point, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Wow.
was pretty terrible. I look back on it now and I feel so bad because at the time where my daughter really needed mom to be worried about her emotions, I wasn't mentally capable of being
Right.
that person for her. And I'm really grateful for the other moms in my friend group that stepped in and
Mhm.
helped with her. I'm really grateful for we both have faith-based board certified counselors that we've
Oh,
seen from the
great.
very beginning. And I'm very grateful that God placed those women in our lives because she needed that.
Mhm.
And I think one of my like my lowest moment, one of my lowest moments when he was sick was we had gotten super bad news, right? They told us there was nothing else we could do, no chemo
Right.
was working. And I left the house that day and I drove up to the top of a mountain near our house and I was sitting there, I wanted to die, right? Like multiple times throughout this process, I've wanted to
Yeah.
die. And I was sitting there, my daughter was at home with him. I just needed away from it because I was
Yeah.
overwhelmed, right?
Uh-huh.
And in that moment, I stuck a gun in my mouth. And I said to myself, I was like, this is the way out of the pain, right? We're
Wow.
all gonna die, this is the way out. And right before I pulled the trigger, my phone rang and it was my daughter asking me if we could go get ice cream when I got home.
Wow.
Yeah. So after that happened, the rest of his illness, if she asked for ice cream at 9 p.m., guess where we went?
Yeah, ice cream.
Pajamas, right? So after when I was drinking heavily, after he died, I had many, many more nights where I was fighting that.
Yeah.
And I can see looking back now, um, I really had to just pull myself out of it because I wasn't comfortable enough sharing that with anybody at the time.
Mhm.
And it was very hard mentally. It was very hard mentally to look at myself and say, this pain is not going to last forever. It's going to ease. It'll always be there. There'll always be a dull pain, but it's not going to
Mhm.
be that overwhelming, crushing,
Right.
right? Like,
Mhm.
and I used to think that if I let go of that overwhelming, crushing feeling, that I was somehow not honoring my husband's
Mm.
legacy.
Yeah.
But he didn't want us to be in pain forever.
Right.
So,
Wow. And I think that's a common thing that people think, that if they can't let go of the pain. They think letting go of the pain is letting go of their late spouse, but
yeah.
it's really letting go of the pain so that you can live life. John 10:10. That's one of my verses I love from my nonprofit. We talk about, it says something about, Jesus came to give us life and live life abundantly. Like we didn't, like widows, we're not here because like our husband died, now we're just going to survive until it's our turn.
Hmm.
Like we need to thrive. And like I'm so happy that you were able to come out of that darkness, because it's something you can't explain to people. And I know the listeners right now are like, yes, I get that. The darkness and that feeling of like, I don't want to live anymore. Like, and sometimes our kids that are the reason we keep living. And
That's the only reason, honestly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
can relate to that, like not being emotionally there for your kids, because you're dealing with your grief and theirs.
Hmm.
And so it's really overwhelming, and it is hard to be able to be there for both of those. So what do you think is the biggest thing, your daughter, definitely, like you said, that got you through it, but what else, like what is that the single thing that pulled you out of this, like the drinking with the Xanax and all that, or were there like other factors, like other people or other, like, I don't know, anything else that helped you get out of that?
I got really good at putting on a facade and telling
Mm.
everyone that I was fine, even though it was really, really evident that I was not.
Mhm.
But I found that it pushed me closer to God and
Mhm.
it made me lean more heavily on the word of God to pull me through. And I mean, there were nights where I was face down on the bathroom floor,
Right.
and I had this moment where I was face down on the bathroom floor with a gun beside me. I wanted to die. I didn't want
Oh
to
my
be,
goodness.
I rationalized. I said, my daughter's going to be fine because my in-laws will take care of her. They're wonderful people. Like she'll have anything she ever dreamed of in life. And of course she wouldn't have her mother or her dad, so that'd be
Yeah.
terrible. But in my head at the time, it made sense.
Right.
And I remember thinking all of those things, and then the story about the healing at the pool
Mm.
flooded into my brain, and it just over and over again, I kept hearing, "If you want to be made well, get up and walk."
Oh, wow. I
Yeah,
love that.
and that's become so much of a mantra for us the last few years because, you know, grief sickness is a sickness. Like mental health, especially in this country, is not really accepted still
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
identified as valid. but it is life altering, and you really truly have to do the work to get through it. But I started listening to, during his sickness, we listened to every kind of Christian music possible. I mean,
Mm,
one of the songs that was absolutely helped bring him to Christ was "Death Was Arrested" by North Point. Okay.
yeah, that's a good song.
And we went to one of their concerts while he was sick, and I had messaged the guys ahead of time and said, "Hey, we're coming. This song helped lead him to Christ. He's sick." And they came out and met him and explained like
Oh,
how they wrote the song and stuff. And then when we got to the day of his memorial service, when we got there, they were there to sing the song in his service.
oh my goodness. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And so when I found myself in the same low place, right, in the lowest of lows, I remember there was a time where I listened to that song 30 times in a row.
Mm,
I mean, like, I just kept playing it, playing it, playing, because I had to be reminded of what Jesus did for me to
mhm.
be here, and, like,
Right.
how I'm supposed to use my talents and use my story and use my testimony to hopefully help other people. And I've spoken at, events about suicide and about mental health, and I hope that my story has reached at least one person who has
Oh,
found
yeah.
themselves on the floor, because sometimes all you need is like a little bit of hope that the future is going to be a little bit better, you know?
Right. Well, I know that your story is going to touch so many listeners who have probably never even told anyone that they've been in the place that you have been. And because of your courage to be honest and open about that, I know it's going to help others because I know a lot of I didn't exactly feel like exactly the same, but I remember the thoughts of like, I don't want to die, but I don't want to live. Like
Sure.
I don't want to be here, And so I know your story is going to touch so many people. So I want to fast forward it to what is life like now? How long has it been, and what does life look like for you now?
Okay. He will be gone 4 years this August.
Okay.
Um, Now life is good. We have moved on to, I've dated some real duds. I did the hard work so other people don't have to.
Yeah, we'd love to hear a little bit about that real quick if you want to
Yeah.
share, or not real
So,
quick. Dating
oh,
stories are very interesting, and I'm sure we can all learn. So,
yeah, so I decided, I knowing nothing about, because I had been married the entire dating website,
right?
you know, time span, so I had
Uh-huh.
no
Me too.
idea. I didn't know the rules, right?
Hmm.
And so, I signed up for several dating websites when I thought I was ready, which
Yeah.
I wasn't ready, but I thought I was, right?
Yeah, yeah, me too.
And I went on a million bad dates. I went on some really great dates.
Hmm.
I have a couple of friends that I met that I'm like, these guys will be my friends for life, because
Yeah.
one of the guys that I met on a dating website, he acknowledged immediately, he was like, "Whoa, your husband just died?"
Hmm.
And he took a step back, like, there are all these people that are predators and they prey on women,
Right.
especially
Uh-huh.
on widows, because we're in such a vulnerable
Yeah.
position. We can't even handle our own emotions, much less bring a new person into the mix, right? And this one guy was like, "I'm not going to date you, but you are awesome and we are going to be very good friends." And we have
That's
been.
awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So I was actually, during my Xanax and wine days, I was
Mhm.
sitting at Starbucks before work, because I used to go. I mean, nobody talked to me about a widow budget after he died. So I was going to Starbucks every day, right? So
Mhm.
I'm sitting in Starbucks, the food I'm trying to force down my throat to psych myself up to go to work. And a guy came into the Starbucks and sat down beside me, and he acted like he had no idea who I was. It was just this chance meeting, and he struck up conversation. We started talking. We seemed to have a whole lot in common. And very quickly, a relationship, bloomed out of that.
Mhm.
I didn't acknowledge at the time how toxic it was. I mean, anybody who is willing to, get down in the ditch with you, it's really easy to find people that will drink all night with you.
Oh.
It's a lot harder to find people that'll crack a Bible open with you, right?
Uh-huh.
So I was attracting, because that's where I was attracting that type of person, right? If
Right.
you're popping Xanax all night and drinking wine, you can bet that there's some skeezy guy waiting around the corner that will do that with you, right?
Mhm.
So it, I dated this guy, and I found out several months later, through the mail, because he had been taking my mail out of my mailbox, that he had cleaned out my savings account,
That's awful.
and he had started a line of credit in my name. He had
Mm.
tried to finance a car in my name.
Wow.
I mean, and I had to, like, I remember going to pastors in my church, and I said, I was humiliated. I had to tell my in-laws that this happened, like, that was our money to live on. It wasn't a lot, right? But it was there.
No.
And I remember going to the pastors at my church, and I said, I'm humiliated. Everyone's going to hate me. He has children in the community. Like, this is terrible. I just want it all to go away. And one of my pastors said, coming from a biblical standpoint, the Bible tells us we have to hold other believers accountable for their actions.
Mm.
And that gave me the courage and the strength to go to the district attorney and file charges. And the grand jury, indicted him on all charges.
Wow.
We came to, after a 2-year court battle, basically. I got part of my money back, but not all of my money back. But
Wow.
it, the message was loud and clear that that wouldn't be tolerated. And I think that it's really important for widows to be, to be aware of that, because he pretended like he didn't have any idea who I was, but he let it slip a few times that he was actually in church, in our church, the day that the entire community prayed over my husband before we went to Colorado for treatment. And
Oh my
he
goodness.
had seen me in Starbucks, and he had gone up to the people at Starbucks and asked them what my name was, things about me. Like, he sought me out for that reason.
Wow. So scary.
Yeah, it turned very violent, because when I did press charges, I had to also press felony
Mm.
abuse charges against him, domestic violence charges. And, I I learned a lot about
Mhm.
myself. Um,
Mhm.
I learned a lot about, things that as parents we would tell our kids this, like,
Right?
the company you keep is very important. I
Mhm.
didn't I knew that, and I didn't follow my own rule, basically. Um, but that kind of put me off dating for about 10 months.
Yeah, I see why.
Yeah,
Scary.
it did. At that time, I was still, it was during COVID lockdown, so I
Mm.
was still drinking, but not as heavily. I was out of the woods as far as the wanting to kill myself, right?
Mhm.
We got sent home for COVID. We're all being paid to sit at home. I was a teacher. Like, we drank in the driveway all summer long, and
Mhm.
I could keep it under control at that point, though. And I didn't
Right.
date. I said, told my therapist, I said, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm swearing off men, right?
Uh-huh.
And when I did think I was ready to date again, um, I met a man who, it was wonderful. I mean, he was a
Mm.
wonderful person, and he still is a wonderful person. But a couple of weeks after we started dating, and we really started to get serious, he had a loss. His
Mm.
mother died, and all of a sudden, I was seeing what I had just gone through
Mhm.
in someone else, and we really tried for about 6 months to make it work. But he was in that spiraling portion of grief
Right.
I had just pulled myself out of.
Yeah.
And you can't, like, I couldn't pull him out of that,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And that was hard. That was really hard, because
Mhm.
I'm like, in a way, I was like, I can fix this, right? Like, I can fix,
Yeah.
but you can't fix it. Nobody could have fixed me either, right?
Right.
So I dated some real doozies along the way,
Sounds
just
like
casually. And then 2 years ago in October, I met my current boyfriend now.
awesome.
And we have been together since then, and it has been amazing. It's been
That's
amazing.
so
And
great.
we moved in together, and we
Mhm.
live in a small town in rural Alabama. We live outside of Birmingham, and everyone wants to know when we're getting married. I'm like, I'm not giving up my Social Security, right? So, not anytime soon. So, yeah,
There's that. Yes. And
yeah, we're not
how
in a hurry.
how does your daughter do with him? How's that
She's
relationship?
she's great. At first, she was very standoffish.
Mhm.
And, you know, I thought I was like, "Oh gosh, it's gonna be terrible. She doesn't like him." But they're a lot alike, and they like to,
Mhm.
they get at each they pick at each other a little bit, and they have
Yeah.
it's a really sweet relationship. I mean, but in no way is he trying to replace my husband,
Right.
but it's great to have like a strong, solid man around.
Yes.
Because I think as a
Yes.
widow, that's a fear. We're like, our children are gonna grow up in terrible
Mhm.
situations because they lost their dad, right?
Mhm.
So it's been really good. She's very happy and well-rounded, and I really couldn't ask for anything else out of a kid. I mean, she was great in school. It's almost like she's she tries extra hard, right? It's like she knows
Mhm.
she has to try just a little bit harder because she's carrying
Mhm.
a heavier load than her friends, right?
Right. What I see is a tragic, awful story, but I see joy. Like that joy can come back. I see joy in your face in the way that you talk and the way that even in the process, there was so much joy, and humor and all
Mhm.
kinds of things during your journey. And then I just see joy coming back into your life, and that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to see, that we can still carry the love for our late spouse and honor them and talk about them and all of that, but we can love someone else.
Sure.
And it is such a gift that your late husband told you to move on, because I've heard the opposite, where husbands, they say do not move on, and people have
Right.
a really hard time. I'm somewhere in the middle. My husband never said either way.
Right.
It was just too hard for him to talk about. He never brought it up. And so that was a little bit of an issue for me for a while, but I had to realize in his perfect state now, like he would be happy for me.
Oh,
He would want
sure.
me to. So that's such a gift that your late husband told you that. What would you say is some advice for a new widow? We have a lot of new widows that listen within their first year. What's some advice that you would give them?
Do as I say, not as I do, for sure. Because um, after my husband died, I was very focused on getting back to normal. I thought normal was going to be normal again, and it was not.
Yeah.
Um, I I did a lot of anticipatory grieving because
Yeah.
we knew he was going to die. So
Mhm.
I thought when he died, that was it, and we could
Oh,
just get
okay.
back to life, and we could just move forward. And I actually became the anti-widow because I hated carrying the label. I
Right?
hated talking about it. I hated, it felt like such a burden, and it felt like it drew attention to me that I did not want, because we had just been through a very public cancer battle and our
Right.
community rallied around us, but then our community also knew everything about us, and it was uncomfortable to me. So I fiercely protected my privacy, and I was invited to grief share and different things, and I declined every invitation. And I'm going to
Mhm.
say that I think that was the wrong decision. I think I should have, at the time, I had people having widows reach out to me, and I kept pushing them away. And
Mhm.
if I had it to do over again, I would have let the widow community surround me with love, because I was trying to talk about, when I did get ready to talk about my loss, I was talking about it to people who had no idea what I was going through because they had never been through it themselves.
Right.
And I really think that, community is important.
Yes.
I think that, just like when someone's ill and people tell you, my husband's sick, people said, you just have to learn to say yes. If someone says, hey, I'm coming to cut your grass, you just have to say, okay. If
That's
someone
true.
says, we're bringing you a meal, I mean, I didn't cook for a year and a half. We had so much,
Mhm.
we're Southern Baptist. We had food piled up on the porch, right? They
Wow.
feed you. So I, I wish that I just would have said yes, because I had people that were trying to point me in the right direction so I could grieve with other widows. And in my head, I thought, well, that's just going to make it worse, because then
Mhm.
I'm an empathetic person, I'm taking on their pain, right? And I find that as I'm further along on my journey, that's not the case, because I find that when I read other stories of widows, or when I see other, watch videos or whatever, that I take away a little piece of something from everyone else's
Yes.
story. And I can apply it to my life in different ways, or I can, especially if you're raising children. I mean,
Mhm.
who nobody there's no what to expect when you're expecting on what to do if your husband dies. There should be, maybe we
That's
should
a
write
good one. We should
yeah,
write that one. That's
like,
so
what
good.
should you do? Because how do you know? I mean, like,
No.
and different widows are in different stages, so I
Yeah.
think it's important to find your group
Yeah.
and to find your people. I have a pretty good support system now. Through cancer and death, we've met many other people that,
Hmm.
that have become widows as our story has progressed, some before Matt died and some after.
Yeah.
And when I finally let those people in, I started to feel a little less alone. And so I think it's really important to be open to that, even if it's
Hmm.
hard to put yourself out there.
Yeah. Well, that's really, really great advice. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about, I know you're a writer. Can you tell me the story you shared with me earlier about how the gift from your husband and how you got back into writing and what you're currently
Sure.
doing?
My husband and I, because we met when I was a weight loss blogger, I used to write a lot about our lives. Well, when my daughter was little, there came a time where I said, I'm telling stories about her life, and these aren't my stories to tell. And
Mm,
she deserves the privacy of being able to one day. This is before cancer,
yeah.
something just didn't sit right with me about
Yeah.
continuously sharing these stories about my little girl, right? And I walked away from my blog. I said, I'm in the trenches. I'm a mom. I, I'm gonna not do this, right? Because
Yeah.
the age of the mommy bloggers. So
Yeah.
I stepped back and I didn't write. And writing has always been a form of therapy for me.
Hmm.
And during my husband's cancer journey, one of our doctors said, because my phone was ringing constantly while we were in the oncologist office, and one of his doctors said to us, he said, you need to pick one platform and share only on that platform.
Mm.
And then you need to walk away from it and not answer your phone because otherwise you're giving the same information from the doctor's visits to so many different people.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I chose Facebook because it was the easiest way to
Yep.
communicate,
Me
right?
too. Hmm.
And I would give a daily update on his condition, and then I would turn my ringer on silent so I could have peace.
Hmm.
And it worked. And I found myself writing not just an update on his condition. I would share verses because I felt like at that point
Hmm.
I had an obligation to talk about all the good things God was doing in our lives through his cancer
Hmm.
battle and to make it not worthwhile, but to make it important, right? To make
Hmm.
his struggle be able to touch someone else's life and hopefully lead them to Christ. And that happened several times throughout my sharing. Um, so while he was on hospice, the last few weeks before he died is actually the last day he was able to go to church
Hmm.
because he wanted to go to church. He was in a wheelchair at that point. We brought him in, walked him in. He couldn't walk all the way down to our seat because we're not back row Baptists. We like to sit right up front so we can pay
Nice.
attention. But he
Uh-huh.
looked over at me. He was like, "We're back row Baptist today," because he couldn't get any further, right?
Yeah.
So, um, that day after he listened to the sermon, he stood up during worship. He raised his hands to God. I mean, it was
Mm.
beautiful to watch. On his way back to the car, as we're wheeling him back to the car in his wheelchair, he looks at me, and I'm expecting him to say something really poignant at this point because it's just been an emotional thing. He said, "Hey, I need you to run by Best Buy for me." And I was like, what could you have possibly bought at Best Buy?
Right.
Right? So I didn't know what I was picking up. I thought it was something for his dad because, I get there and they hand me a MacBook Air across the counter.
Mm.
And I said, there must be a mistake because my husband is dying and he would not have purchased this.
Right.
And they double checked the information and they said, yep, he did. So I got it home and I said, what do you do? What is this? He said, that's your anniversary and your birthday, or your anniversary, Christmas, and birthday present because I won't be here. And
Mm.
he said, I want you to write again. And I was, at the time, I was like, yeah, okay, I promise you I'll write again. Right.
Mhm.
And so I just stuck it in the safe because we were in those last few weeks. We didn't know when he was going to die. And I stuck it in our safe. Every time I opened the safe, because after he died, we had all of our paperwork, everything was in there. So it's constantly in there. I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, birth certificate, death certificate, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I kept opening the safe, and the way I had it in there, it would fall out and hit me in the foot. I would basically kick it. It was still in the package. I hadn't even busted the plastic
Wow.
on it. And I would kick it back in there, and that happened multiple times over the course of about 2 months, and then I was like, "Okay, Matt, I get it. I need to write again."
Yeah.
I picked it up and I started blogging. I'm not as regular of a blogger as I probably should be, but I do write almost daily now. I'm
Nice.
currently writing a book about our story. I used to think the story of our life was truly how we met and like the fairy tale feeling of marrying him
Yeah.
and being married to him and all of those things. But now I really understand that the true story of our life and what'll make the most impact on people is how he died with such dignity and
Yes.
how he really truly lived his life. He lived his life for other people and for Christ and not for himself. And I think that's the story that is really going to, make a difference in the lives of other people.
Mm, that's beautiful. And it is, I'm also a writer, and it is so like it just such good therapy for yourself to write and to just like process everything. And you do have such a beautiful, unique story, just the way you guys met, and then just all the amazing things that God put together when he was sick and afterwards. And I think it would be a wonderful book,
Mhm.
especially with your openness and honesty about the suicidal thoughts and all of that, the mental health stuff. I think it will help impact a lot of people. So how can we stay in touch with you so we'll know when your book comes out and all of that? Where can we find you on social media? How can we email you? And I'll
Sure.
also put links in the show notes so people can use those.
Sure. You can email me at blondeblackWidowMedia@gmail.com.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can follow me on TikTok. I post funny
Ooh,
TikToks of my daughter and I. We love TikTok
me
at
too.
at Cyndi Cyndi and Quinn Quinn 2.0 because
Nice.
our
I'm gonna have
first
to
one got shut down. So,
Okay, I will definitely have to find you right away in there. I
yeah,
love doing widow TikToks too. And
sure. And
like I've
yeah.
met a lot of widows on TikToks, like a lot.
Yes, I have too. I don't really direct. It's more silly, funny, fun
Just funny
stuff.
things.
Some
Yeah.
stuff about my husband. There's a lot of things that we promised and we did. Like he always wanted to go to every University of Alabama football game, home game for an entire season. And not this past year, but the year before we did it. I still don't know how we did it. We got
Hmm.
fantastic seats for every
That's
game.
amazing.
We had a blast. You can also back read my blog at
Oh,
blondeblackwidow.com. Yeah.
perfect.
I'm not
Perfect.
as regular of a blogger there as I would like to be, but I'm really
It's
working
all
hard
right.
on my book. But
That's
I think it's very you can kind of read through the time like from when he died, from when the blog started, and I
yeah.
read back and I can see my own struggles now, you know. I can
Yeah.
see that I was processing things in the way I was.
Yeah. Well, I love your willingness to be open because that's when we're able to help other people. Because I always think like, if I had to go through this, I wanted to help other people. And
Sure.
it seems like you have the same attitude too. Like we would never ever choose this life. But because we went through it, we can help those other, as I like to call them, baby widows who are just in that new part of the journey where you think you won't survive. And your story is going to help so many people. So thank you so much for being here today. I know that a lot of people are going to be impacted by this. So thank you. And just to wrap it up, if you liked this podcast, we always love it if you could give it a little 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. We're always looking for more guests. You can email us at widowedtoosoonm@gmail.com or Instagram or Facebook, all the places. And hopefully Mark will be back next time, and we'll see you later. Thank you.